Okay, so hi guys, I know Gwen already introduced me. My name is Jingyi. Thank you again for letting me go first because I am kind of stressing out about finals, so I hope I don't mess up this presentation. My presentation today is about blogs, putting part of yourself in every piece of writing. So like Gwen said, I am on the journalism team, and during the course of this internship, I got to take on a lot of writing projects that I really enjoyed. And so I've decided to share some of writing tips and my creative process with you guys. So a little bit about myself, because I know we're not on the same team, and then I'm also doing a presentation on how you should put yourself in every piece of writing, so I should probably talk about myself a little bit first. I'm from China. I grew up in China, and I came to US when I was 15 alone to go to high school in Miami, Florida. And I was in Miami for 4 years before I came to LA to go to UCLA for college. I see someone raising their hand. Maybe do you also go to UCLA? If you do, that's awesome. And I'm double majoring in global studies and communications. I'm currently still in LA, still in Westwood, and I heard was just a COVID outbreak, so I'm kind of scared. But I enjoy UCLA. I'm on the UCLA debate team. Like I said, I've been doing debate for like the couple of months of COVID. So it's been really cool. I'm actually the captain of UCLA debate team. So if anyone wants to join, please do. And my interest is photography, like I said, debate, and of course, writing. The photo that I have up is like one of my photography when I went to Japan. It's shrine in Tokyo is really cool. I highly recommend everyone to go if they do visit Japan. That's one of the reasons why I wanted to start this internship, is my passion for kind of Japanese aesthetic, culture, and just traveling in general. Awesome. So what are some of the projects that I've done? I did the landing page for Come On Out English. That was really fun. That was one of the first time I got to work on a website that's not one of my own. And I learned a lot about just how to optimize search engine, like search words, and how to write in a way that's more user-friendly on a website, and how to like get to the point fast when you're writing about a feature of the website. That was really fun for me. And then something that's less fun, I did the private policy for Come On Out English, and that took me so long because it was such a weird like write-up that I haven't really done. And to be honest, I kind of like semi-failed at that task, but I did like provide kind of a, Gwen is shaking her head, but you know, she's just being nice. Kind of failed, but I did provide like an outline for the private policy, so it's not like complete fail, but there were a lot of information that I wasn't able to fill in. So, but it wasn't a very like learning experience for me. It was still fun to do. And then I did a Japanese etiquette blog with Eric, who's also on the journalism team, and English is a second language blog by myself. And then I did a lot of peer editing for people on the team for their blogs and their projects. And on the presentation today, I'm gonna be like mainly focused on the Japanese etiquette blog and English as a second language blog, because those are the creative process that I think I have like the most to say about. But overall, it's been really fun and fulfilling to take on these projects. Awesome. So getting on to the main part of the presentation, putting part of yourself in every piece of writing. So what do I mean by this, right? It's just like kind of what it says. It's basically inserting yourself in every step of the way when it comes to writing as a creative process. So the first step is kind of coming up with ideas, what to write about, right? So in an internship like this, I think it's really fun that even though we kind of have to write for the websites for the company, we still get agency when it comes to what we want to talk about. So when we come up with ideas, I like to think about how might my experience be connected to the work that I am doing. And when I look back onto my experience as a person, what are some things that I can bring to the table for this company specifically or for this work specifically that can let me like develop that into a piece of writing? And what are some things that I know that others might want to know when other people look up Come On Out English on Come On Out Japan, or just Google search in general? So that's like kind of how I insert myself on the step of coming up with ideas. And then we go into initial planning for the writing process. I'm going to go into that later with more details, but basically I think of it in the way of how do I Google as an online user, and how to frame like the kind of general topic that I have in mind into the best blog title that people might Google. And the writing process. What would you want to know? Just like, what would I want to know if I am one of the potential people that might search up something like this topic? What are some things that I might want to, like, I want to know? Do some audience analysis and like, what do they need? And the way that you do this is by reflecting on your experience and kind of see when you were going through these, what are some things that you might want to know? And I'm going to go into that like with more details later. And then at the end, framing your answers in the best way. So how to avoid generic answers, how to put very personal answers down, very specific answers down, and like how to make the answers more personal, and how to make people feel like they're not just reading something like very generic online and they don't need to be reading the blog that you're writing. So more specific talk about the first step, what to write about. So connect your experience to the work that you're doing, like I've already said. So to give an example of how this was kind of materialized in my blog. So my experience is, like I've said, I'm from China and I came all the way to the US to get my high school degree and college degree, and potentially down the road work here. So my experience is English is my second language, surprise, surprise, but I did learn it in the Chinese education system, but also a large part of it is I had to kind of work on my own because Chinese schools are very crowded. In my classroom, we had like, I went to a private school, but we had like 70 people in a classroom. So it was very about taking initiative on learning things, especially language learning. And the work I'm doing is for Come On Out English and Come On Out Japan, but in this case, Come On Out English is more relevant. The company needs kind of like new features on its website, needs website traffic, and the target audience are people who want to learn English, right? That's one of the target audience that will be potentially searching up things that the company can offer. So because of that, I combined these two, I thought about it, and then I came up with the blog, How Do I Learn English as a Second Language? And I think that's a very relevant thing that many people search on. I once searched what is like the best way to approach language learning. Surprise, there is no best way. But what is like the best way to start this process? Many people Google this, and potentially they would click on my blog, and then that would take them to the company website. So it's like the perfect chance for me to combine kind of my experience with the work I'm doing. I think this is one example of like when you're coming up with ideas, really just think about how your experience inform the things that the company needs, and like that's the best way you can bring what you have to the table for the company. So I think that's like a really good lesson that I've learned, and I got to use this skill to kind of come up with things that I learned about. And that's also true for the Japanese blog. I didn't put it here, but like I've been to Japan a bunch. The Japanese blog is about Japanese etiquette. I've been to Japan a bunch. I remember myself wanting to not embarrass myself in a new country and wanting to search up these things. So Come On Out Japan obviously also needs website traffic, and that is kind of a way that I like combined my experience with what the company might need. The next step is, how do you Google? So this step, I would say, is when you're kind of initiating your idea, thinking about whether or not you want to take on this idea, whether or not this is a good idea, how to make this topic compelling for yourself and for others, is to do some audience analysis. Who might need this and how will they find this? And I think the way to do this, because this topic is so personal, is kind of to look back onto your own experience. So if you were them, what would you Google? That's utilizing your experience and think about audience needs. Like I said, for example, when I was looking it up, I would Google things like, how do I learn English, or how do I start learning English? Things like that. That's very basic. It sounds like very basic and intuitive, but it is important when you're coming up with a title for the blog. So when I was first working on the Japanese etiquette blog, Eric and I didn't frame a lot of our section title or even the blog title as a question. And then Gwen was telling us how you should really frame these as a question. So when people Google, it pops up on their page easier. And I think that's a really good lesson. And I took some time and thought about how I would Google, and she's right. You Google in the form of questions. You Google in the way that you specifically word things a certain way. And I think because it's one of the good things about picking things that are up your alley and like in your experience is you can really like personalize these titles because you know how these audience think because you were one of them. So that's like a really good way to do this. And another thing is, what will make you stop and think, I need to read this? So obviously other writers are not stupid. They're also going to come up with compelling titles. So it's really about really like going in deep into your experience and then utilize like the advantage you have about knowing these things personally and then coming up with titles. And some tips is like, get to the point. Don't come up with like a flowery title that you think are cool. Just usually some people like to click on the thing that really matches up with the question in their head. So like, how do I learn English as a second language? And what do I need to know when I go to Japan? So things like that. Very get to the point. And like I said, frame things as questions. So, sorry. Yeah, the next thing is like, what would you want to know? This is kind of like content generation and like writing process. So I think this part is really like, to reiterate, it's really about connecting back to your own experience. And so every step of the way, you have to put yourself in the audience shoes. You have to think about what would you have, like, what did you want to know when you were going through the same thing or similar things? So what would you want to know? And I put on the top of the slide, the most important thing is, again, audience analysis and being very specific about your advice, stories, and tips. So my first blog, to use it as an example to really illustrate this, is How Do I Learn English as a Second Language? Audience analysis is people who would potentially search up this blog, would potentially click on this blog, are new learners getting started, and people who have already probably read up on some other website's advice before they come to your blog. So how to make these content pop and how to make them want to stay, right, is talk about how to get started. So that's the first thing I talked about in my blog. Is you probably have been Googling this for a while now. And my first tip is just how to get started. Just start. That's the tip. Just start doing things, because I know you've been Googling for a while. I know you've been thinking about what is the perfect way to start. There is no perfect way, just get started. So that's something I know that people are doing, because that's what I was doing. That's what I was doing when I was starting to learn English. I was kind of frantically trying to find the perfect way. And I wish someone would just tell me there is no perfect way. Just start already. Just start like reading 3 things every day. Start watching Friends. Start like doing something. And that's how you get started. And so these are type of advice that I wish I knew, that I know not many people who are like generically writing this can come up with. Not even English teachers sometimes will tell you that, because they themselves know English, so they don't really know sometimes these personalized advice that like you need to get in the mind of learners to know. And then like other than basic needs of the language, what else do you like want to look out for? Like this is also something that English teachers might not be able to tell you, or generic advice. They might just tell you like grammar things, very specific things that are important. But because I was a learner, I now I think back to what I wish I focused on more was like cultural things, things that would make my English sound more natural, things that English like native speakers would do. So these are very specific tips that I put in my blog that I know people might want to know, and only probably people like me wouldn't know because of my experience. And the next blog is Japanese etiquette, what do I need to know? And people who are searching this up are probably people who are new to Japan. You won't get people who have been to Japan like several times. Like now when I go to Japan, I no longer look up what do I need to know. It's only that first couple of times that I would do this. So you know you're getting first time visitors, people who are new to Japan. That's like an audience analysis. So you don't need anything too in depth, but you probably need a broad range of things that first time visitors might do, right? So because of this audience analysis, Eric and I decided to write about basic etiquette in public that you would probably probably want to know when you first visit a country, how to behave on the streets, how to behave in a restaurant. So etiquette in traveling relevant scenarios, for example, like restaurants, subways, and temples and shrines, or like scenery that people go to. So this is another thing that I like. It's not just about Japan, right? It's also about if you've traveled, you probably know. But because I'm going to go into that a little bit later, but the specifics of these things that were selected is because I've been to Japan specifically. I know what places have more cultural significance. For example, it would surprise many people that subways is kind of like a culturally significant place in Japan, that there are a lot of culturally specific things that I'm from China. We also have subways, but the etiquettes are a bit different. So these are like things that you are in your experience and you know that like you didn't want to F up here when you went to Japan and you probably screwed up somewhere and now you want to put it here so for people to read. So that's like the first like content generation is very important, and just really like dig deep in what you wanted to know and what these audiences specifically might want to know. And then what would make you exit out? So this is really like the writing process. You're really writing it. So this part, and I put it on the top, utilize your personal stories. And this is very important because this is how you avoid generic answers. So make your answers personal with specific, like some of the writing techniques that I have done. So hopefully it would help you guys in the future. I kind of organized them into like little tips. The first one is start by identifying problems. So what I mean by that is like the example I already gave in the previous slide, identify like unique problems that other people might not be able to identify. Identify problems that you think people don't realize until they screw up. So for example, especially these tips type of blogs, getting started is hard and like fluency does not equal to mastery, learning can be tedious. So these are problems that I encountered when I was learning English as a second language. And I wish that a lot of people come in Googling these with these fear in their mind. So when you put it down like that, they're like, interesting. I've been thinking about this. Let me read this and how to avoid these problems. So in the Japan one, some of the problems that you might encounter, culture shock, like where's the trash can? Which is like a lot of people's like first thing when they go to Japan. It's like, I don't see any trash can. How is this country so clean but with no trash can? And I think this is an interesting problem that a lot of people encounter, and they kind of had to take out their phone and Google when they're on the streets of Japan holding trash. So I think it's interesting to put this in the blog, and many people were like, interesting. Like this is a problem I'm encountering, or I have encountered, or I might encounter. And this is a unique problem that really only people who've like really paid attention to their travel experience would know. And obviously tourist destination and how to act there. So the first writing tip is like start by identifying problems. So when people connect with those problems, they don't want to exit out of this blog because they know you're probably going to address specific things that they're encountering or they might encounter. And use personal anecdotes. Share what you did and how it turned out. I think there's something interesting about reading other people's failures and successes. So for example, in my English blog, I talked about like one of the best things that happened to me when I was learning English is when my dad got me a laptop and I got to watch The Simpsons for a whole summer. And that's how I like became really good at English during that summer, and just like kind of edged out everyone in my class because I was just watching English videos a bunch and playing League of Legends using English. And I think this is something like people don't really think about when they think about language learning. It's not to force learning, but to kind of in a creative way to learn. And that's what makes the learning experience fun and can even be more effective. So I think using personal anecdotes like this also kind of make people want to stay, because they don't, like, of course, if you're learning a language, Learn grammar. That's important. You don't have to be a genius to know. You don't have to Google to know. But I think these personal anecdotes that give extra bit of like thing is what helps people stay in your writing. And I think even if you're not giving tips, you can just be generally talking about something in a blog. I think using your failures and successes still like hooks people in. I think that's very fun to do. And then the last one, I think it could be potentially one of the more important ones, is give very specific guidelines and reasonings. Don't just give generic answer and don't explain why you're doing this. People can have quote unquote stupid questions because they're first getting started. Obviously, they're reading a blog about something. You want to explain why you're giving these tips. Be very specific about your advice and explain yourself. So for example, in the English blog, after every advice I give, I had a section with bullet points called "How does this help?" And I explain all the good impacts that are coming out of this. And this is even part of my personal experience. I am a debater. So in debate, they tell you give impacts for every claim you make. Don't just say this is good. For example, voting is good for a country. But why? What are some impacts that come out of it? Give 3 impacts to substantiate your claim. This is kind of the same way. So utilize like your experience in your life to really strengthen your writing. So when I write, I also am very particular about giving impacts. How does this help? Why do you want to be doing this? Why is my example important? So example of what to do, you say, learn about the cultural background of the United States before you come to study here or when you're learning English. Give some example. How do you gain that cultural experience? By watching shows, by traveling. So give very specific guidelines so people are not lost and answers their questions before they even ask it. And the Japanese blog is like, here's what you need for a first-time visit. Give reasonings as to why, like you're probably going to visit shrines, and this is why this is the most important blog you should be reading on Japanese etiquette than anything else. So I think being very specific and kind of just really, again, use your personal experience to your advantage and come up with things that people might want to know and just explain them before they even ask the questions that you know they're probably going to ask. And at the end, add in your creative side in your blog. Blogs is more than just about writing. It's also formatting, it's also everything else. And I know I focused more on like tips giving blogs, but there are also other types of blogs, creative blogs and things like that. And I think it's really cool to just add in pieces of yourself in there and make you more proud about your experience, your own writing. So here's are the photos that I put in my Japanese blogs. These are like photography that I did when I went to Japan. And it just made me really happy to be able to add in my creative side to this internship. And I like really thank the internship for giving me this opportunity. So yeah, that's it. That's my presentation. And thank you, Gwen, again, for giving me this opportunity in this internship. I hope I didn't screw up this presentation. And if anyone has any questions on what I've said, I can answer them. If not, that is the end of my presentation.